This is the last testing video. There are just a few test cases left to write for the expense list filters component. There are 4 methods that we need to test, and one of them has 2 different paths, so we're going to write 2 test cases for that one. Let's go ahead and outline the 5 tests that I'd like you to write, and then I'm going to set you free to knock them out on your own. First up, we have should handle, and this one is going to be a text change. So when I change that text input, does it indeed call the correct prop? Then we're going to have another one for should sort by date. We're going to have should sort by amount. And we're also going to have should handle date changes. Now, the last one that we're going to define is going to be for the guy right here. So we have a single test that sets the state on focus change. We want to make sure that works as well. So we'll toss one of them right here. Should handle date focus changes. Perfect. So it's going to be your job to actually write these test cases. For the first 4, you're going to assert something about the spies, making sure the correct props were called. For the last one, you're going to assert something about the state. Now, for simulating a change to the select, you can use the exact same techniques we've already explored. You're going to use simulate, you're going to use the change event, and all you need to do is provide something for e.target.value like we've done for all of our simulates. For example, when we've simulated text changes. So take some time to knock this one out. You can fill out all of these test cases, then go ahead and make sure they all pass. Check your work. Take a moment to pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, let's go ahead and set all of these up. That's going to be a few different calls to test. So I'll start by just duplicating a single call to test 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to start with should handle text change. So in this one, all we're really interested in doing is simulating a change for the text and ensuring that the correct prop got called. So I'm going to get that done using wrapper. I'm going to use find to find an input. We just have one, so there's no need to use at. Then I'm going to simulate something. I'm going to simulate the change event. Now I do want to pass something in for the event argument. e.target.value needs to exist, so I'll set target right here. Then on there, I can set value. And for this one, you could have picked any value you liked. I'm going to create the value variable just up above right here, a const value. And I will use bills for this one. Now, actually, you know what? We do use bills for the test data, so I'll switch that over to something else. Let's go ahead and use rent. So we have value defined, and we are setting it right here. We could break this down to one line. Awesome. And now all we need to do is make our assertion. So if all of this stuff actually happened correctly, what would we expect to have happened? We would expect that set text filter got called with that data. So I'm going to expect set text filter right here to have been last called with, and in this case, we would have expected that to be the value. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and actually check if this one works. I'm going to save the program, and we should see passing test cases over inside of the terminal. Over here, we do have a passing test suite. Excellent. So the next one we're going to do is going to be should sort by date. I'm going to take that and copy it up here to the text value. Now for this one, we want to make sure that sorting by date works right here. So we have to simulate a change on select, and we want to make sure it does indeed change. I'm going to go ahead and knock this out right here. The first thing I'm going to do is switch it over to amount. Now, I didn't tell you to do this, but you could have done it. Maybe you didn't do it. So remember that by default, what do we have? We have the filters data showing up, and that is already date. So I'm actually going to take what I did here to switch it over to amount first. Once again, not necessarily necessary, but definitely allows the test to really ensure that things are working correctly. Next up, we're trying to simulate a change on select. So wrapper dot find, I'm looking for the select. I'm going to simulate change, and I am indeed going to pass down the event object. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and set target, and I will set value equal to the value variable, which is not yet defined. And for this one, we're looking for a value of date. So I'll just define that up above. Const value equals the string date. Excellent. Now that everything is at least getting submitted or simulated, we can go ahead and make our assertions. In this case, I'm going to expect that sort by date was called. It doesn't need to have been called with any arguments since we actually don't use any. So I can expect sort by date. And in this case, we are just going to use to have been called. Awesome. So as long as the SPY was called, this test case will pass. Over here, it's running through the entire test suite. And in just 3 seconds, we were able to verify that our application is working as expected. Next up, we have should sort by amount. That's going to be very similar to the last one, just the other way around. So I can go ahead and start with that test case code. And once we do have it in place, we are going to make a few tweaks. So we actually don't want to set props. We do want to start off at date, and we want to change it over to amount. So I'm going to put that right here in the string. Now the simulate code can stay exactly as it is, and all we have to do is change the SPY, making sure that sort by amount was called. I'm going to go ahead and save the test suite, once again running through all of the test cases, and as long as it passes, we'll move on, and it is indeed passing. The last two, should handle date changes. For this particular test case, we need to make sure that when the picker from React dates fires that event, it actually works as expected. Now, what do we expect to happen? We expect it to get called with an object with start date and end date, and all we do is pass those up through the props. So let's go ahead and start this process off right here inside of the test callback function. I'm going to kick things off by making up a couple of dates. Right here, I can create a const for start date. I'll create a new moment. I'll start at 0 and I will use add to go into the future. Let's go ahead and go forward 4 years. All right, very good. And then I'm going to duplicate this line, changing it over to end date. And I will go ahead 8 years. So we now have a 4-year span of expenses that we would be showing to the screen. With start date and end date in place, we can actually go ahead and call the thing that's going to hopefully trigger the SPYs. So right here, we'll use wrapper.find. We are looking for the date range picker. Remember, we want to access its prop and call that. So .prop. The one that we're looking for is defined down below. Right here on date range picker, we have on dates change. So I'm going to go ahead and access that one, on dates change. And we're going to call it with the stuff it would expect. In this case, it's an object with those two properties, start date and end date. Once we have both of those in place, we can actually go ahead and assert something. So we're going to assert that set start date was called with start date, and that set end date was called with end date. Right here, we're going to add 2 lines for that. Expecting first up, we will use set start date. Expecting that to have been last called with. And I'm going to expect it to have been last called with start date from above. Now I can go ahead and duplicate this line and change it over for end date. So that would be set end date, capital END, and over here, I would expect that to have been called with the end date moment from above. Once again, I am going to go ahead and save the test suite. Over here, you can see we are getting an error. I've used moment and I haven't imported it. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that up top real quick. Importing moment from moment. And once we do have the import in place, we should be able to save the test suite and watch all of those check marks fly by. Here we have passing test cases. Everything is looking good. So there is just one more left to go. Should handle date focus changes. I'm going to go ahead and set that one up right there. Then I can remove the challenge comments and we can go ahead and fill this guy out. If we switch back over to the expense list filters file in here, we know that we need to get this guy triggered and then we need to make sure the state was changed. So I'm going to pass in a calendar focused value. Let's get started by defining the value we're going to set, const calendar focused. I'm going to set this equal to one of 3 values. So it can be null. And if you remember from the documentation, it could also be start date, meaning that the start date is focused, or it could be end date, meaning that the end date is focused. This is different from the individual date picker where it was true or false because you really only had 2 options. It was either open or it wasn't. Now it could be closed or it could be one of 2 open states. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to end date. And the next thing that we're going to do is actually change things by accessing date range picker once again. So wrapper dot find, we're looking for date range picker. I am then going to go ahead and access one of the props on date range picker. The one we're looking for is called on focus change. And if you remember, we set that up over here. If we scroll down, on focus change. So this is going to make sure that our handler runs, and then we can confirm it worked as expected. So all I need to do is pass that value in, the calendar focused value we picked out. Last up is our assertion. We are going to expect something about the state. The state should have changed. So I'm going to expect in here, we are going to access wrapper.state. We want to get just an individual state value, so I'm going to pass the thing in as a string. And what we're looking for is a field of the same name, calendar focused. I'm going to grab that. Then I'm going to go ahead and assert it is equal using to be, since we're comparing two strings, the variable from up above, calendar focused. Perfect. Now, if I go ahead and save the test suite over here, we should see a passing test suite, and we are indeed seeing that. We now have a complete test suite that tests everything that makes up our application. We used Enzyme to test our components, and we just used regular function calls previously to test things like our action generators, selectors, and reducers. So the goal of this section was to give you an introduction to how you can test your React apps. So whether you go off and build your own application or whether you're trying to get a job, you can actually show up and test the code you write. Because in a lot of professional settings, that is going to be required of you. When we're writing apps for ourselves and we're just trying to have fun with it, we might leave testing off, and that's okay if we have a simple project that we're not really going to be charging anyone for or expecting anyone to actually use. But if we are working for real companies or we are trying to launch a startup of our own, an automated test suite is going to help catch all of those issues that can bring down your service, create bad relationships with your customers, and in general, just be that real pain, that thing that keeps you up Saturday night working. So my hope for you is that you never have to do any of that because you do have a test suite in place and you can catch the issues before you deploy them to production and break the application for your customers. Speaking of deploying, that is exactly what we're going to focus on in the next section. So in the next section, the goal is to take all of this code and actually get it up live on the web. We're also going to talk about how we can customize Webpack for production to greatly reduce the size of our Webpack build. I am very excited to get to all of that. It's one of my favorite sections because students can actually upload and share their projects via a live URL. Let's go ahead and dive in to the next section.